morning, everyone, from wherever you're joining, and welcome to the Cities on the Frontline speaker series. I'm Leon Capetas from Resilient Cities Network. For those of you joining for the first time, Cities on the Frontline is a virtual thought leadership speaker series, which features solutions for cities. It began back in 2020 through a partnership between the Resilient Cities Network and the City Resilience Program of the World Bank Group. And the series provides city practitioners, the industries and residents that they support with a platform for knowledge exchange. Today is the fourth session for the speaker series for 2025, and it's hosted with the support of the BioTrails project, which is funded by the European Commission. The purpose of this speaker series is to have an open and honest learning conversation. We have today, as far as I can see, about 350 registered participants for our call. And to facilitate the discussion, we ask you to write your comments on the Q&A function of Zoom. Right now, thank you. I can see that some people are already typing. We welcome you to introduce yourself over the chat function and say where you're joining from. The session will be recorded, and materials, the summary, the presentation you will see will be posted online on our website. Before I hand over to our panel, I would like to briefly set the scene and set some context for today's webinar. We all know that ecosystems have been long treated as resources to extract from, and not as living systems of which we're part of. So now we're facing the consequences. Climate shocks are becoming more intense, biodiversity loss, strained natural resources, which are pushing urban systems to their limits. So it's clear for us and for most of you here, I guess, and since you're joining this conversation, that we need to rethink how we build and how we live with nature. So today, we will explore how renaturing cities, basically bring nature back into urban environments, can restore ecosystems, firstly, but also strengthen resilience. We will explore how cities are embedding nature into planning, not only through high-level strategies, but also through localized and community-driven solutions. But it's not only about the impact humans have within the city boundaries, the impacts on nature. Urban lifestyles and infrastructure have far-reaching effects on biodiversity. For instance, through water, energy, waste management services, emissions, global supply chains for food and materials. All these activities have indirect impact on global biodiversity. Just to give an example, Athens, where I live in Greece, brings most of its water from reservoirs that are located 200 kilometers away. This has clear implications on biodiversity in the source environments. So this illustrates an important point that cities and their residents can have significant direct and indirect impacts on ecosystems, from urban to peri-urban through to distant forests. So we need to support cities to be able to recognize their ecological footprint, build better connections, stronger connections, positive connections with ecosystems they depend on, both near and far. And this is the focus of our BioTrails project. So today we have here with us two experts in their fields who work on innovative approaches to renaturing cities. I would like to introduce you to Dr. Gara Villalba. She's a professor at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. She will share with us her experience from the NUTRISOIL project, which looks at regenerating urban soils through organic waste reuse, and how this supports building resilient food systems. So this is a local action with regional biodiversity implications. We also have with us, very happy to have you here, María Angélica Mejía, who is the regional curator for Latin America and the Caribbean at the Nature of Cities. So she will introduce their biodiversities initiative from Latin America, how they help cities restore ecosystems, build green and blue economies, and engage communities through citizen science. Well, I think right now, I think I've introduced you, Gara and María. Gara, you go first. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining and listening to what we have to say. I'm very happy to share this short presentation with you. One second here. Yeah, is that an okay with the presentation, Dion?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Great. Yeah, so I will be sharing our experiences in advancing circular nutrient and carbon solutions in cities through promoting urban and peri-urban agriculture. And what do we mean by urban and peri-urban agriculture? Pretty much what you can already think by these words. In other words, peri-urban, we're mostly talking about open air. Sometimes there's also greenhouses, but in general, we're 10 to even maybe 20 kilometers around the city, and the extension of the fields is larger than what is considered more urban agriculture, where we have smaller lots of land. Many times it's just for personal production. We can also talk about vertical farming. We can talk about integrated rooftop greenhouses, using the rooftop of buildings, and that's more considered urban agriculture. Also the use of LEDs, as we see here on the pictures on the right. But in general, we can talk about all of this as local crop production. And I will continue on the rest of the presentation talking about both of these in the general term of urban agriculture. So why do we want to promote urban agriculture? Most of you are most likely aware of the fact that most of our population resides in cities, and so obviously we're quick to think that most of these cities have to import their food from far and away places. And so growing autonomous, a little bit more self-sufficient in the food production in the cities is obviously important. What maybe we're not so aware about is the fact that most of our food depends on fertilizers, and these depend on phosphorus and nitrogen, and both of these are very resource intensive. So phosphorus is an unrenewable resource. It is limited, and some studies even point to having enough phosphorus at our current rate of extraction of maybe lasting up to 100 more years or so. And on the other hand, nitrogen, which we need in the fertilizers, is very energy expensive in terms of fixing nitrogen. We have plenty of nitrogen in the air, but fixing it so that we can use it for plants is very energy intensive. So urban agriculture gives us the opportunity, as I will be discussing in a little bit, of reusing phosphorus and nitrogen that is already in our waste, and we don't have to go through these energy intensive processes. Also gives us the opportunity to shift towards healthier diets and also minimize food losses. So the supply chain is a lot shorter, and we can certainly reduce a lot of that food loss, which for crops, especially things like tomatoes, can be about 20 to 30% of crop loss from the moment that we harvest to the moment that it's on your table. Also, urban agriculture can improve local economies. We can create jobs and have people feel a little bit more in touch with their city. Foster social well-being, revalorization of unused spaces, especially through urban agriculture in using rooftop rooftops of buildings or unused open spaces. It also increments our urban greening. And as a matter of fact, we did a study in my group where we actually looked at the cooling effect of peri-urban agriculture for cities. So the urban agriculture or the peri-urban agriculture that we can do around the city can actually act as a cooling belt, which is especially important for cities that are hitting quite a bit of heat waves during the summer. And we're, for example, here in Barcelona, we're having more frequent and more intense heat waves. So irrigated agricultural fields close to the cities have a cooling effect. And the nice thing about urban agriculture is that it's something that cities have competencies to act and make it happen. So the project NUTRISOIL that I want to discuss a little bit, the results from this project here, aims to promote this urban agriculture that we've seen all these wonderful reasons why we should promote it in our cities, and by means of recovering nutrients and also the carbon, taking advantage of the organic waste from wastewater treatment plants, from compost, but also, and as I have pointed out here in this figure, from organic matter like pruning residue. And that's what this project has a big emphasis on this pruning residue, which is untreated organic matter. And this is important because it really helps us restore and maintain all this microbial and bacteria activity that is happening in the soil, which actually really helps in the cycling and the having a healthy cycle of these nutrients in the soil. As a matter of fact, what we do when we fertilize soils with these mineral fertilizers is we're really dumping these fertilizers on the soil because it's not healthy. If it were healthy soil, we would barely have to put in any additional fertilizers for it to grow crops. And that is what we have been finding here with farmers in the metropolitan area of Barcelona and elsewhere across Europe, is that after years of tilling, after years of mineral fertilizers, we have these degenerated soils, as we see here on the right, where we have fragmented rooting patterns, and we don't have that healthy, biodiverse microbiota and happening in the soil, as we see here on the left. And what we're finding is that the pruning residue is actually very key towards promoting this healthy soil because it has a very unstable type of carbon. And so it is this instability of the carbon that helps it decompose in the soil, whereas carbon that's more stable, such as what we find in biochar or what we find in compost, actually it's so stable already that it takes a lot longer to promote all this biodiversity in the soil. So besides the food production, so this is about urban agriculture, but besides the food production, other services that this healthy soil gives us is that it captures CO2, it maintains the microbial activity and biodiversity, as I just mentioned. Also, this healthy soil does a much better job with water management, and that's something, especially here in Mediterranean climate, we're finding more intense episodes of rain, of flooding, and the healthy soil is able to retain the water and not have this erosion and just runoff that just basically washes off the field. Furthermore, because of this resource optimization of being able to use these recovered nutrients and this pruning residue, that's all waste that's being produced in the city, that reduces a lot the environmental impacts associated to this local crop production. And furthermore, there's been recent studies showing that our immune system actually is very much related to the healthiness and the biodiversity of the soil that we step on the ground. So those are all good reasons to push this forward. And so now I wanted to share some of the experiments that we did and some of the results. So we've produced spinach and sweet potato, several cycles of that, and also in commercial fields. So this is we've actually sold a lot of the crops that were produced in this experiment, which required being able to get all these different treatments regularized for this project. So we did the experiments with mineral fertilizer, so that would be our control. Then we also treated the soil with struvite, which is from wastewater treatment plants, and it's a form of recovered phosphorus. We also use labinor, which is recovered nitrogen from the meat industry. We also used compost, and then we also used just the pruning, which is these wood chips that we would just apply to the soil within the first 20 to 30 centimeters of the soil. That's that treatment. That's the depth of where we apply this for all of the treatments. And what we found was that when for the treatments that had the pruning, we were able to increase the soil organic carbon by at least 24%. So compared to all the other treatments. And that is sort of a cheap way of getting an indicator for this microbial activity. And also, I say cheap way because the analysis to find out what the count is of all those bacteria, worms, etc. That was a little bit out of reach for this project, but that was our indicator, was this soil organic carbon. We found that for short cycle crops, such as the spinach, which lasted between a month to 2 months, the yields were quite low for pruning. So the pruning did not really suffice the nitrogen that the plant needed. The soil was not regenerated enough. So the regeneration of soil actually takes quite a long time, years. It's not something that we can just do with the first application of this thing we put on the soil. So obviously the project is short, and these are just results of about 1 year of experiments. So the yields for the spinach were short because at first the microbial activity is competing for that nitrogen with the spinach, right? So the spinach, being a short cycle crop, doesn't really have that much time to grow well. On the other hand, the sweet potato, which was about 5 months, the sweet potato did great and was able to outlast until all that bacterial activity finally just stabilized and wasn't a competing factor for that nitrogen anymore. And we actually obtained the highest yield of all treatments, even compared to mineral fertilizer, when we treated the soil with the pruning residue, nothing else. And we also saw better water management. Well, you'll see here, we have these chambers in the bottom picture here, because we were also measuring the emissions. And we also wanted to see what was the environmental impact of these treatments, because nitrous oxide, N2O, is a problem for agriculture. As a matter of fact, 75% of N2O emissions worldwide come from agriculture, and that's 300 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. So this is a pretty big deal, and if we can reduce this emission factor of nitrous oxide from agriculture, we would, gain a lot in terms of reducing our global warming. And we had good news on that front as well. So here we have N2O emissions, and we have it for spinach and sweet potato for the various treatments. So NPK being the mineral fertilizer, and then the other treatments that I mentioned. And as you can see, for pruning, it was the lowest. As a matter of fact, we were able to reduce the emissions of N2O from pruning application to just 0.002% of the nitrogen applied, as opposed to the 1%, which is the emission factor from IPCC. So you see that is orders of magnitude below, and something definitely to look further into. And some of the questions that we wanted to answer were, for example, this one. So we say, okay, this is great. Cities should be doing this. This is a great way of regenerating the soil and making it healthy again. And we can also reduce impact of our agriculture. But some of the cities were saying, hey, we're already sending all that pruning residue to be combusted for electricity generation, which is also great, right? Because we're substituting fossil fuel. And so we're comparing apples and oranges here. It's not an easy answer, right? What do we do? Do we regenerate the soil or do we produce electricity? And what our take here was, and what we were telling cities is, look, we have several ways of producing renewable energy, but we have very little margin in terms of regenerating our soil and having healthy soil again in a biodiverse soil. As a matter of fact, I can't think of many other ways besides the pruning residue in terms of supply meeting demand, right? And so besides that explanation, we also did a life cycle assessment of the various impacts. And here I am showing you the global warming. And you see that here on the right, on the bar on the right, we have electricity production. So obviously you have this yellow on the bottom, which is all the savings from the fact that you're substituting fossil fuel. But on the top, you have the emissions because you are incinerating all that wood, right? And then when we look at those emissions for the sweet potato production by applying this pruning to the soil instead, we see that carbon capture is actually a lot bigger. And I wanted to show you here the difference between our one experiment, which was just a total of 2 months. I'm sorry, with spinach, with sweet potato was 5 months versus 5 years. Because like I said, once we apply this pruning, we barely have to apply any more pruning for another 5 years or so. This is our hypothesis right now. And so when we normalize to the fact that we don't have to do that for another 5 years, you see that the direct emissions on the field of CO2, which we have because there's all that respiration of all that bacterial activity that is finally, starting to revive again in the soil, you see that reduces when we look at a 5-year span. And there's lots of other impacts here that we don't have time to show. This is just CO2, but we could talk about eutrophication. We can talk about water consumption, etc. And lastly, I wanted to show you the fact that this project had a technical part with these experiments, and then we were also wanted to share what we got from these experiments in workshops. So we're saying, okay, we know all of this works. We're very psyched about this. Why? And this isn't all new information either. Why are there these obstacles in cities to do this circularity? So we got together stakeholders from all the different stages of this nutrient and carbon circularity, from urban community. So these are obviously people, consumers, but then also urban planners, municipalities, technicians, scientists who are also working on this more social side. We also had stakeholders from waste and wastewater management, where those nutrients and that carbon is found and where we want to recover it from, as well as farmers and scientists that are looking at soil health, etc. And what we had several questions. We had one question. Basically, the questions were to figure out what were the barriers and the solutions, right? So the first question was, what is your vision in terms of soil health, resource circularity, and urban food supply in 2030? So kind of short term, what is your expectations within where you work, right? Within your part of that circle. And then the second question was, what are the obstacles and difficulties you face in order to move in that direction? And then what needs to be done to promote the circularity of nutrients and carbon within the urban community or within your sector to be able to make that happen? And we analyzed all the data. And we came up with 7 themes. I am not going to go over these right now, but I know that you'll be able to get my presentation. So I'm hoping to leave that with you. I'll just give you one example of a theme where we also, from the analysis of all the stuff that was said in the workshop, we were able to define the barriers, the actions, and the vision based on those 3 questions that I just mentioned. So for example, here in the metropolitan area of Barcelona, one theme was regulations are adapted to local realities to facilitate carbon and nutrient circularity. This was a theme that was identified as being absolutely key for us to move forward towards that circularity. So, for example, the problem here was that Spain trying to adhere to a 2019 directive on fertilization is not allowing sludge to be considered as part of a sludge from wastewater treatment plants to be used as recovered nutrients to be applied in the fields. And so here what we were trying to show is that how different regulations can counteract each other, and especially if they're at different levels. And so this is a very important thing that needs to be addressed in order for us to reach the circularity. And the last part of the project was a workshop, but more at an EU level. So here we invited different representatives from various cities you have here on the left. And from what we learned for the Metropolitan Area of Barcelona, where it was more of a practitioners workshop, and this is more a policy, we wanted to share what we learned as practitioners from all those stakeholders and ask them, how is your city performing now? How relevant are those themes that we identified for your city? And then we also asked, how effective do you think the EU is in addressing those themes? So coming more from above. And you can see here the answers on the right. So for those 7 themes that I mentioned before, and you'll see that in general, everybody expects to be doing better 10 years from now, more or less, or actually less than that, by 2030 we were saying, and kind of lower marks as where they find their cities today. And I think I'm probably running out of time, so I'm going to just end it here and open it for questions. I hope I've raised some interest. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gara. No, that's really interesting work, and congratulations to you and the group. It's hands-on, and but it also gives policy recommendations. It gives context for better decisions in Spain, but also in other places, not just Europe, but globally. There are a few questions that came in the chat. I have a few questions of my own, but I'll keep them for later after Maria's presentation. So we've heard now something very hands-on, but I'm looking forward to hear more about biodiversities and planning, how you plan with nature, how you integrate nature into urban environments through localized and community-driven approaches. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Leon. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yep, we can.
Okay, it's a presentation mode. Hello, everyone. Super happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I see people from around the world, Thailand, Canada, UK, Philippines, everyone. So thank you for joining us today. So we will talk about biodiversities.
We don't see it as a full screen yet.
So yes, as I was saying, back in 2021, I was the coordinator of this initiative that was called BiodiverCities by 2030. I will say it was broader than a project, and of course I will talk more about this. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the place where I will be presenting today is from this work of the Alexander von Humboldt Institute, which is the okay, someone is sharing an idea on the chat. This is the National Institute of Biodiversity of Colombia, and I'm very proud to say that is one of the 18 regional centers worldwide that has been appointed to support contracting parties of the Convention of Biological Diversity in the achievement of the Montreal Biodiversity Framework. So of course, that makes me very, very proud and happy. Next slide, please. Oh, that's okay. Yeah. So this is not new for the Alexander von Humboldt Institute. We have been looking at cities for over a decade, and then we have several milestones when it comes to the BiodiverCities initiative, not only working with the national government, but also with partners as the World Economic Forum and the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, and most recently with UN Habitat. And we can probably touch upon those initiatives at the multilateral and regional levels further ahead in our conversation. So I will not go deeper into why biodiversity is important and why now. I guess we all are in this session because we believe it is important. Next slide, please. Without biodiversity, we will not be able to live in our cities. We will not be able to have hopefully clean air and water. And as Gara was explaining, healthy soil for nutritious and tasty food. So all this complex network of ecological processes at the end allow us to basically live in cities and also create different habitats, not only for us, but also for other species that share the city with us. Next slide, please. Okay, so what exactly happened back in 2021? This is not new approach, right? Like mainstreaming biodiversity into urban planning is not new, and the idea of bringing together two worlds that conventionally have been approached separately, biodiversity and cities. I can no longer say biodiversity, as you can imagine. So back in 2021, we had this collaboration with the World Economic Forum, and we brought together experts globally and also nationally in Colombia. So we established two commissions to think about how can we frame and conceptualize and what will be the main topics for biodiversities. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, just to give you an overview, what will be those non-negotiables when it comes to define this vision. Of course, we have the usual suspects like green infrastructure and green spaces, ecosystem services. I would like to call the attention on probably spatial patterns and how important it is to address land use change, since, I mean, urbanization is one of the main drivers for biodiversity loss, basically because of the area and healthy soils that urban expansion, is consuming. So, I mean, by definition here, one of the reflections is that a biodiversity is a biodiverse region, right? Because it depends, of course, on the neighboring ecosystems and water sources and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So as a collective effort, the outcome of these was the framework with 5 commitments and 3 enabling environments, which I'm pretty sure you are familiar with because these are very common to find in handbooks and guidelines for nature-based solutions. So when it comes to how can we do a more integrated urban planning, or how can we promote governance and financing in order to really position these kind of alternatives of solutions for urban design, and how important it is to measure and monitor biodiversity within and around cities. So those are mostly the enabling environments, and then we, like at the top of in the wheel, we have the 5 commitments, and I will show you with examples what does it mean. Next slide, please, and I will share on our chat box the links for the publication. So today we will go over 2 examples. One has to do with ecological connectivity from the lens, of course, of biodiversity, and the other one, it's about bioeconomy. Next slide, because I heard this audience is very keen on examples. So this is the happy part of the presentation. So yeah, so sadly, this is our friend, the fox, that we are not able to...
Maybe then we have a recommendation in the chat how you can go full screen. Do you want to try once more?
Of course. Okay. Thanks for your patience. So here we are. So this is an example on how can we move from the species to the planning, right? How can we integrate the movement, like for instance, in this case, telemetry exercises with also wetlands mapping and classification to provide recommendations for urban planning. So what we did here was, first of all, we focus on blue areas. So we did an identification and classification of wetlands. And the most important thing here is that we did this from the expert point of view, but also with communities, right, and citizens. So we find out that across this metropolitan area, which is the second most important metropolitan area of Colombia, Medellin is the capital of this metropolitan area, and it encompasses 10 municipalities. So we found around 146 wetlands, thanks to this kind of like participatory mapping approach as well. And then we also did a vulnerability analysis. When I say we, it's very ambitious because, of course, this was the work of my very brilliant colleagues in different areas of the Alexander von Humboldt Institute. So they run like this analysis on how biotic communities will respond in the face of climate change, basically in two different scenarios. And then we did this analysis on functional connectivity. So as we know, structural connectivity is when you have a map and then you identify the green areas, and then you see the corridors, you see the parks, you see the protected areas, and then you can kind of like speculate, okay, there is like some kind of connectivity. So that's a structural, as we know. But then here, when the foxes are moving, and we did this telemetry exercise with around 55 species with, having this GPS color. So we were able to see how they were moving. So this is like functional connectivity, right? Like how actually species, wildlife, they are using the green areas. And then why did we did all this work? Because the idea was to incorporate this perspective of climate change and also blue spaces with the wetlands, and also ecological connectivity with this telemetry exercise, integrate all this to provide recommendations to update the metropolitan plan for public green spaces, so that we are sure that biodiversity is present there. So okay, the second example that I will show you today is bioeconomy. This is a very interesting exercise, and it deals with, how can we make biodiversity like a competitive advantage in cities. And normally when you think about ecology, urban ecology and biodiversity, you think about the city as a network, but then you probably don't consider local markets as part of that network. But yeah, especially like farmer markets, they host biodiversity, and biodiversity is not only the species, right, itself. Biodiversity is also the local knowledge attached to that species. So of course, in local markets, you have both. You have the species, and you also have the knowledge of the traders and people, working in this market. So we chose different spots in the city. To the left, you see our big coastal wetland with mangrove forest. This is the city of Barranquilla. Sorry, I didn't mention this. Barranquilla is a very important city in our Caribbean coast. And then, as I said, we had local markets, and to the right, we also look at some parks and green corridors. And what we found after, this is a very thorough investigation, but just to bring it to one sentence. So what we found here is that the corozo palm, like the fruit of this palm, and the ecotourism could be were like identified as the most strategic products or options to position Barranquilla as the bioeconomy Caribbean hub, right? Like the bioeconomy hub of the Caribbean region. And then this was possible thanks to, as I said, research on traditional and useful plants found in Barranquilla's markets, which is a publication that you see, the cover that you see to your left. And then the flora used by birds for feeding, nesting, and sheltering. So how can bird watching and the knowledge of the fishermen and everyone working in this big coastal wetland can be potentially, could transform Barranquilla into one of the most important cities for ecotourism from the point of view, of course, of biodiversity, conservation, and management. Next slide, please. And I guess that's it, because I think that's already.
You're
Oh yeah, sorry. Sorry. So due to time, we will not touch upon the citizen science exercise, but that was also very important. But it's important to keep the expectations so we can maybe touch upon this during our conversation. And of course, this was possible thanks to the effort of a lot of people working at the Humboldt Institute. And this is, I guess, evidence on the capacity of this institute to work transdisciplinary and also to bring together different actors and partners and supporters, not only from the point of view of funds, but also like for political engagement and technical support. And then finally, contact details of my colleagues at the Humboldt Institute and also my own email address. So happy to further engage in our conversation. Thanks for your patience, but I'm happy that we were able to see the folks around the metropolitan area.
Happy we saw the folks too. Thanks, Maria. Great presentation as well. Yeah, your last slide, you're right. You cannot work on urban biodiversity if you don't have a multidisciplinary group. Many people's expertise are needed to renature cities. So it's time for to open this to the audience with questions. We've had a few questions coming in the chat, but first perhaps we can, to warm up, we can take the Zoom poll we have prepared just to get a sense of the participants, the audience's perspectives. So the question today is, what is the biggest challenge cities are facing when trying to renature urban environments? I will answer too.
This is sad. We cannot vote.
We cannot vote, yes. Okay. Not to, we shouldn't bias the result. So let's give it another few seconds. In the chat, Daniel says all of the above. But we don't. We only allow one. So number one reason. So okay. I'll invite you first, Maria, to comment. First of all, what did you expect would be the preferred answer, and your reflection on why competing land use has been the preferred one.
Yeah, so I agree with the majority of people here answering that that's the most pressing issue in our cities. As I was saying, urban expansion is one of the most important drivers for biodiversity loss. And then normally in conferences, we hear that cities are growing because of people only, but actually cities are growing 2.5 more times than population in area, right? So it's a problem of that we are not really planning our urban growth in a proper way. So yes, cities are growing because of people, but also because of inefficient land use, basically. And this, of course, is a problem for our water sources and agriculture, because then this needs very healthy soil. So that will be my reflection. And just, I mean, coming from Latin America and working with Global South cities, out of 423 of big cities in the world, 90% of that number, of that amount of cities, will expand into tropical forest ecosystems. Like, they will become basically cities in biodiversity hotspots. And that's a fact. This is proven. Like, this is scientific evidence behind these statistics. So it's very scary what could happen if we don't plan properly our expansion. Thanks.
Gara, your reflection?
Yeah, well, I have
and
lots
what
on
did you
this
expect
one.
also?
Somebody wrote on the chat, how about all of the above? I agree with that. And what I have learned from our work and from looking at various cities is that, oh, that disappeared. Can we have that back on there? I wanted, or no? Okay, well, so for the competing uses of the land, thank you, and priorities. I don't know, at least here, for example, for Barcelona, yes, there's, people are getting more money out of their field to be able to set it for something else. But what we find is that that's not the main driver towards what's been, at least if we look at urban agriculture, what's been reducing urban agriculture, right? Originally, back in the day, cities were built in places that were fertile, and everybody in that city was eating from the food that was produced right there, right? We've obviously moved away from that way of working. We're importing most of our food. That soil is no longer fertile, as I showed, because we've degenerated it completely, but we're also a lot of people. But what we're finding is that, yes, that land is better used for other things, for more urbanization. But in general, we're finding that there is a huge gap in young people wanting to take over these jobs. So yeah, agriculture is not that attractive to young people right now. So we're finding lots of farmers that are in their 70s, in their 80s even, and yeah, they have nobody that's going to take over that. So obviously, yeah, I'm going to sell it, or my son is going to sell it, or so that's a huge thing here. So I think that all stems from limited public awareness, and not knowing enough about our food and being owners of how that food is being produced. So all of these, but I would really hit on this public awareness.
They're all important components. I absolutely agree. And you having had conversations with people, we see that it's life choices also that people make. There are some comments there. A few people say that it's also about political will. Yes, indeed. Some countries are, some cities are very strict with their green belts and policy on development. You mentioned, Maria, that cities are expanding more than the population that is coming in, whether it's from climate migration or other reasons, I see in the chat. It means that they're not developing in a compact model. There is a lot of sprawling, so there is more land consumption, I guess. We have a few minutes. We have around 8 minutes to take some questions from the chat. You can probably have read, Gara and Maria, some comments on pocket forests, how important they are. I've highlighted a few of the questions. I'm not going to be able to ask them all, but a question for Gara. One of the people in our audience, I'm quite interested in renaturing urban brownfields through agriculture, abandoned or underused industrial or commercial sites. I can see that many advantages, but also the regulatory hurdles and other practical issues like soil contamination. If you have any good study cases, Willy, professor from Bonn.
So if I understood correctly, because I'm not finding that question there, so I can read it as well. What time is that at?
It's 4:16.
Okay, it's later.
Well, 3:16 for you, yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say we haven't gotten there. Okay. Okay, great. Yes, as a matter of fact, yeah, soil contamination is one of the biggest obstacles that obviously we identified with all the stakeholders. Is if we don't have good enough compost, if we don't have good enough pruning residue, then this is something that we cannot apply to the fields. What we have done from our experiments is we were very happy with our pruning residue, because as of many years now, the metropolitan area of Barcelona is not able to use pesticides or chemicals in any of the green parks, of urban parks, and all the pruning residue is coming from these places. And we did analysis on the pruning, and that worked out. On the compost, the waste management facilities have a huge problem with this because of microplastics. There's so much plastic in the organic waste that people are throwing away. And so it's very difficult to have high quality compost. And this is something that, again, that public awareness, I think the moment we bring in closer the crop production and it's decentralized and people are more part of that supply chain and they're there with it and they see it, then you realize, oh no, I'm not throwing that away in my organic because they're going to be using that just 100 meters down the road, right? So I think that is important. But in terms of remediating soils that are heavily polluted with heavy metals and things like that we don't have experience with.
Thanks, Gara. So that brings it back to community awareness to a certain level, how you dispose your organics as well could play a role. A question for you, María, from the audience on indigenous knowledge. Specifically, indigenous knowledge is critical and community leaders need consistent support over multiple political and funding cycles. How do you capture this in your work? We don't see you right now, but
Leon, can you hear me? Because I'm having some connectivity issues, so I turn off my camera.
We can hear you.
Okay, then that's good news. So oftentimes we think about indigenous knowledge outside cities. So, for instance, with this BioBlitz or citizen science example, one of our 8 cities was Leticia, that is the capital Amazonian region here in Colombia. And then it was a very important work because for the first time we had this exercise, including 2 of our indigenous resguardos, which is the legal word to recognize these communities. And there it was important to see the exchange between expert knowledge and also indigenous knowledge in this case, and how when we were talking about the species and how the species behaves or how it relates with other species from the perspective of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and then listening to some of the members of these communities, which overall we were 60 people participating in this BioBlitz in Leticia. So, of course, it was a very important exchange. And also when it comes to wetlands and urban wetlands, in Colombia, we have indigenous communities living within our major cities, like not to go that far in Bogota, our capital city with 8 million people, 8 million inhabitants. There is some work from one of the resguardos, one of the indigenous peoples, so that the local, like the municipality, could incorporate the way they approach the network and the hydrological cycle in a specific area of Bogota into the policy, into the urban wetland policy of Colombia, of Bogota. So it's still a challenge, as I said, not only because we oftentimes only rely on what it comes from science or more academic or expert point of view, but also because we oftentimes don't think that this indigenous knowledge is relevant within urban environments, and of course it is. And I have one more example of bioeconomy in Bogota, but I just leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you too. I hope this answered the question. I'll take one final question. Unfortunately, there are many interesting comments, but one final question for you, Gara. People are asking if pruning it can be used to decrease wildfire risk in the wildland urban interface areas. So basically collecting pruning waste for urban agriculture. And I'll combine it with another question for a brief answer. What is the risk for contamination, even post-treatment for organic matter that you use?
Wait, let me answer the first one, because the second one I'll ask you to rephrase in a moment. I didn't understand that well. Well, the pruning residue that we were using for this, and that we saw that was enough for the regeneration of the soil of all peri-urban agriculture happening in the metropolitan area of Barcelona, that's all from parks and gardens. We do have 2 large urban forests in the metropolitan area of Barcelona, but that is actually managed by a different entity of the metropolitan area of Barcelona. It's actually of a more regional level, and their access to that wood and chipping it and bringing it in, that's not viable right now. The way what's happening right now, I had a meeting with them. They are collecting, but all the wood remains on the surface. They're not putting that someplace where it's all together and it's accessible and we can go use it and farmers can go there and pick up as much as they need. That's not happening. And but as a fire safety procedure, getting rid of that biomass from the surface and putting it someplace, just now there's just not the resources to do that. They're just leaving that right on the ground. And the second question, sorry, say that again.
I think we'll have to skip it because we have a minute left and we'll need to wrap up the session. Sorry about this to the friend who posted it. I would like to thank you both, Gara and Maria, for your exciting, very interesting work and the presentations you gave. What I would like to do is also invite the audience to our next session, most likely on the 19th of June. More information will be shared soon. We will share these presentations, the material online, the recording and the summary. So with this, I think Maria, Gara, myself would like to thank you for being here. And sorry, I need to interrupt this very interesting conversation. Thanks, Gara. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you. Thanks. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day. Bye-bye from
Bye-bye.
Nairobi. Bye.